this open for 20 seconds. So then that's this thumbnail becomes the thumbnail for the Facebook. We're streaming live to Facebook right now and YouTube and LinkedIn. And so we are today with Sanguinetti, Attorney Sanguinetti. Welcome to the program, Attorney Sanguinetti.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's do the irritating beginning.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our podcast. Another great episode is on the way.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts and join Stephen and Jim as they talk about everything under the sun and have a whole lot of fun.
All right.
News, sports, movies.
It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
Pop culture, and puppies.
You love puppies.
It's the Watch Talk Radio podcast.
Well, let me explain to Attorney Sanguinetti why that is. My son does a lot of the clipping of these. We clip down our show into smaller bits. I'll make that available for you, sir, when we do that. And he hates that beginning, so I always play it just so he can hate it. So that's why I do it.
It's a father's prerogative.
It is. So I have an ending too that he hates, and I do it all the time. So, but let's start the show.
Welcome to the Trust Radio Network. Join your host, Attorney Stephen A. Leahy, every Saturday night at 7, right here on AM 560, as he engages in conversation with some of the most trusted professionals in all of Chicagoland. Enjoy interviews with local professionals dedicated to providing the very best products and services. Learn who they are, what they do, and most importantly, why they do it. Take a step inside the minds of some of Chicagoland's most successful business leaders and learn all there is to know every Saturday night at 7 on the Trust Radio Network. Now, here's your host, Attorney Stephen A. Leahy.
Hey, welcome to the program. I am your host. Like I just told you, I'm Stephen A. Leahy, and he wouldn't lie to you. So I am here with our technical producer, Joliet Josh. Thank you, Joliet, for all you do. This show is sponsored by the Law Office of Stephen A. Leahy, PC, and Open Tax Advocates. Open Tax Advocates helps business professionals solve IRS problems forever. We help them with audits and levies, liens and garnishments, collections, unfiled tax returns, and payroll tax issues. I also help people with mortgage foreclosures, loan modifications, bankruptcy, and other debt-related issues. So if you have any of these problems, or if you know someone who does, you should give us a call at 312-664-6649. Again, that number is 312-664-6649. This is the Trust Radio Network, where I introduce you to trusted professionals, people you can trust when you're making important decisions. And you may have noticed, if you've listened to the show, that I am interested in speaking with local attorneys. Nobody wants to hire a lawyer, but when you need one, you better find the right one, right? That's my advice to you. So that's what we help people do. We want people to find the right attorney when they are looking for one. And so I want to introduce our guest this week. His name is Attorney Raymond Sanguinetti. Woo-hoo. Welcome, Attorney Sanguinetti.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Pleasure's mine, sir. I'm so happy that you can join us today and we get to know you. So in that vein, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I was born and raised in Oakland, California. Decided to go to law school in Chicago. I met my wife in law school, and she decided I was going to live in Chicago and not go back to sunny California. So that's my Chicago journey. And the irony of it is my wife is from Miami, Florida. So I think we have to have her head checked as to why she picked this climate. But happy to be in Chicago. It's a great city. The people are just phenomenal. The weather's not very good. But 28 years later, I finally adjusted.
28 years you've been here. That's pretty good. Where did you go to law school?
I went to the John Marshall Law School, now known as the University of Illinois Chicago.
I know it well.
School of Law.
I know it well since I went to law school there too, and I will always call it John Marshall. even though it's not called that anymore.
Right. And it's such a disservice to the lawyers getting out, because my experience as a young lawyer going to like the Daily Center and all the courthouses, 75 to 80% of the judges are John Marshall Law School alums. And so when you got in your first time in court and the judge kind of takes you back and like, oh, wants to find out about you, and you have that commonality.
Yeah.
Now you say you go to the University of Illinois, Chicago, they're looking at you like, well, okay, what's that? So I think that's a disservice for young lawyers.
I agree with it. I agree with that. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But is practicing law something that you always wanted to do?
It's something that I was always intrigued in. Obviously, I've always been interested in politics, and obviously, most politicians are lawyers. They write laws, and looking and reading biographies of our founding fathers and even people that I admire politically, they generally ended up being lawyers for one reason or another. And one that comes to mind is John Adams, probably one of the more underrated presidents. But as a lawyer, he was phenomenal, and he took his legal mind and was able to do a lot of things with it. So that's what always intrigued me about the law.
Well, you just brought up John Adams, and what's his famous case, right? Is that he the Boston Massacre that he isn't that right?
Yeah, here's a patriot getting British soldiers that murdered other patriots off the hook. I mean, it's a not guilty finding. So that tells you something about his character. And hopefully, if lawyers have that type of character, I think we have a better society.
Absolutely, I agree with you. When I was, it wasn't something that I always wanted to do, practice law. But someone said to me once, that group of people over there, they run the world. I said, well, can I be a part of that world? So I know it's being facetious, but it's kind of true in that there are a lot of important positions here in America are held by attorneys or former attorneys. So when did you? I'm sorry. Go.
I was going to say, but it's important because if you're talking about writing laws, if you're a legislator or if you're in a position, if you have a legal training or legal background, you're going to be able to better understand what it is that you're writing or what you want to do, or the levers of government to pull in order to get something done, because you do have a legal framework to operate from.
Agreed. And as you say kind of intrigued, but when did you make the decision that you first tell me where you went to undergrad? Where'd you go to undergrad?
I went to a school, and that also changed its name too. So I think any school I go to ends up changing its name. It was called California State University Hayward, which is right south of Oakland, California. And now I think it's called University of the East Bay or whatever, but it's part of the California State University system. I was a political science major, and I had a minor in mass communications with an emphasis on journalism. So that was I wanted to at that point probably become a journalist, and I saw that the pay doesn't really pay very well unless you can make it onto some big network or something like that. So that transitioned me to well, how can I do something that interests me and hopefully make money and start a family someday and provide for them. And the law was that venue.
And so when did you take some time off in between when you decided to become an attorney, or was that something that happened while you were in undergrad?
I ended up taking some time off from between college to earn money to pay for going to law school. So I took about a year and a half to do that, and so I could pay my first year of tuition and have that taken care of. So that was I didn't grow up very wealthy. I had to sort of get out and earn everything I got. So.
Well, I understand. I was on the pay-as-you-go program myself when I went to law school, and actually when I finished undergrad, I was on the pay-as-you-go program, and that turned out to be. I know people tell you it was easier then. It wasn't that easy, but we did it. So
no, you can look back on it. It seems very easy, but when you're going through it, it's not pleasant.
I agree with that. Is that so? You came to Chicago to go to law school. Was John Marshall something that you chose? Or is it something that just popped up because you had some choices, obviously, to where you wanted to go to law school?
Well, I had choices, but in Chicago, that was the only law school that accepted me. I think I applied for DePaul, was the other one. So I really wanted to go to a big city. I mean, not that Oakland or San Francisco, they're big cities, but Chicago is an iconic city. And there's sort of mythology to it, and I wanted to experience that while going to school and see what that's about. And I'm still here. So
there you are.
Obviously,
That's right.
the hooks are in.
Well, I'm always interested in that, people's the attorneys, their journey to become an attorney, because some people always wanted to be an attorney. Some people kind of decided later. And so I'm always interested in that journey. How do you become? And then the next thing I like to ask people is, what was your first job out of law school?
My first job out of law school was coincidentally my first interview out of law school. There was an ad in the, I forget what the publication was. It was the John Marshall Connector or whatever the euphemism was for a job posting newsletter. And it said, if you're interested in labor, employment, or ERISA. Law. I didn't even know what ERISA was. I kind of had some idea what labor employment was. And so I went for the interview. It was for a law firm that represented organized labor. My family, my background is growing up in a blue-collar union household. I never looked at myself as like an advocate for the labor movement or workers or anything like that. But I took the interview, was answering the questions, and it was kind of one of those things where you realize you fit somewhere just coincidentally. So whether you call it divine providence or just good old-fashioned luck, it just really I hit it off there. It was sort of like you say, Chicago's my kind of town, and the unions were my kind of people. I really enjoyed them. They're whether it's the lawyers that I was working with, just regular, came the same background as me, blue collar, working class, no errors about them. And the clients were as equally engaging, just regular folk that had no errors about them, just wanted to do the right thing. And for whatever reason, I just gelled with me, and I spent 17 years doing that.
Oh, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to take a little bit of a break. Tell people how they can find you. Give us your telephone number.
You can find me. I'm located in Wheaton, Illinois. My phone number is area code 630-510-4917. That is my direct line, and my law offices, if you're familiar with the western suburbs, are the corner of Roosevelt Road and Naperville Road in Wheaton.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to take a break. I'm going to come back, and we're going to continue this conversation with Attorney Sanguinetti. You won't want to miss it. So we're going to thank you, Joliet. Take us to a break, Joliet, here on AM 560. The Answer. That was new, huh?
Was that all right?
Oh, that was great. I never did that to Joliet, though. I never told him to take us to a break before. Okay, now you're going to find out why I'm asking these questions. Okay, not that I'm not
leading up to something.
Not that I'm not interested in all that, but I very much am, and I ask all of my first-time guests these questions because I'm very much, as I mentioned to you, I'm very much interested why do you become an attorney? We had like 3 attorneys, 3 or 4 in a row, tell me it was because of Raymond Burr and what was it?
Ironside.
Perry Mason. Perry Mason. We had like 4 in a row. Yeah, Perry Mason. I was like, I thought that was amazing.
Well, if I gave you the real answer, you would probably cut me off, or I'd give myself a bad reputation. It's like, did you ever see Sean Connery in the Great Train Robbery?
I did not.
And they asked him, why do you rob trains?
Because that's where the money. That's right.
Right.
I get it. Like I said to you, this is kind of the same thing. Those guys run the world. You want to be part of them? It's like, yeah, let me try to be part of that crowd. It's like, yeah, I think that makes sense. But almost almost everything anybody does is, in the end, you got to make money. I mean, that's just the reality. Just it is. Okay, Joliet, let's do the next segment.
And now, back to the Trust Radio Network on AM 560. The Answer. Real conversations with some of the most trusted professionals in Chicagoland. Once again, here's attorney Stephen A. Leahy.
Hey, welcome back to the show. I am your host. I'm attorney Stephen Leahy. We are here with Joliet Josh, our technical producer on AM 560, The Answer. Our guest today, and we've been talking about, to our guest is attorney Sanguinetti, Raymond Sanguinetti. He's an employment attorney. And we're going to get to know him a little bit more. We were just talking about how he what brought him to law school and what he did after law school. And so I'm going to tell him why I'm interested anyway. But here's the thing, Attorney Sanguinetti. Again, first, welcome to the program. I have 2 sons, and both of my sons are now at John Marshall, but it ain't John Marshall. I get it. I don't know what it is. Okay. But they both are there at law school. And so I always want to know, what kind of advice would you have for not only law students, but new attorneys? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Well, for law students, everyone's different. Not all advice is the best fit, but get practical experience while you're in law school. I was fortunate enough that the law school formerly known as John Marshall to participate in what's called the Fair Housing Clinic. And what the Fair Housing Clinic afforded me was the ability to practice law without being an attorney under the supervision of an attorney. So it's a clinical environment. And I was able to, as a second-year law student, draft motions, step up in court under Supreme Court Rule 711, and actually argue a case in front of a judge. You could handle clients, handle discovery, doing all that stuff before you're ever even out in the real world practicing law was invaluable because I found that transition to be able to be a lawyer right off the get-go without that learning curve that you have. I mean, there's always going to be a learning curve, but it softened that to the extent that when I started working, I could handle a court call that very day. And understand how you write an order. I think you're old enough to remember. I think it might still be at the Daily Center. It never opens up again. The carvings and how you write an order and what you have to actually write in it. Like with a court being fully advised in the premises and all those things. I had that leg up stepping in there where I knew my way around the courtroom, and people would say, "Well, this guy didn't just get out of law school; he's been practicing for some time." So that was a huge advantage, at least in my mind, and it made it easier for me to practice as a young lawyer because I didn't have the feeling of inadequacy that I didn't know something because that way I already knew to make my way through it.
When you went out and got a job, and you said was that a litigation job? Did you appear in court, or how did that work for you?
The law firm I worked at, they were basically outside general counsel for the Chicago Carpenters Union. And they had other unions that they did work for throughout the Chicagoland area. So as sort of an outside general counsel, they had no in-house. You'd handle everything. The gambit of, so if they're getting sued or if they need to sue a contractor to collect on unpaid benefits or wages. So I was right away in federal court. Here's fresh out of law school, lawyer stepping up, arguing for Judge Holder, and you name it, all the judges in the Northern District, and also in the Daily Center. I would handle small claims. So the 11th floor was mine. So I would do bench trials and all those things right off the get-go. Handle everything, and that was a huge, I thought, a benefit for me now that I'm an older lawyer, that I have that breadth of knowledge and experience. It's not just about one little niche or facet. You can handle kind of pretty much anything, or at least know where to find the answer. So the learning curve, again, is not as steep. And I credit that a lot to doing the clinical program, going back to your first question, is that you have to have an open mind approach to learning, that you can't be afraid. You just got to get out there and do it. And you develop your base. The more you expose yourself to, the better you are in pretty much everything, especially the practice of law.
Well, I know that the first time I've had some attorneys brought them up and with me to be their first time in front of a judge, and it can be a very a nerve-wracking experience for someone that never appeared before a judge. I remember I had a young lady, and I asked her, "Do you want to go to court with me?" She's like, "Yeah, I'd love to go to court." What do I have to do? I say, "Just stand there and introduce yourself." But she was so nervous, all she had to do was give her her name. That's all she needed to do. But you got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So again, I'm going to go back to advice to law students. I think that is very good advice. Get involved in the 711 program. Tell people what that is, because I don't think people understand what that is.
The Supreme Court has a Rule 711
that allows
non-licensed attorneys in law school to practice law under the supervision of a licensed attorney. I mean, you obviously can't render legal advice to a client or anything like that, but you can act as long as someone's basically looking over your shoulder, making sure the professional rules are being followed, and you're giving sound advice and take care of malpractice issues and all that. So it's a learning device. It's a way to allow students to basically get a legal internship, so to speak, without actually being a lawyer.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful for students, to get in front, as I mentioned, just to get in front of a judge, just to stand up and say, "Hey, judge," and it's good. Now, I've talked about this on the show before, and I'd like your opinion. Like you said, you get out of law school and then you go to district court. Pretty impressive, district courts, aren't they?
Well, right, and I must admit, I was a little bit scared stepping up in the U.S. District Court. I think it was Judge Blanche Manning was the first federal judge I appeared in front of. And I was like, wow, this is a real deal courtroom, like something you would see on television, with the solid wood walls, and it's a courtroom, and the bright lights, and the courtroom's packed. So, that definitely was a very intimidating at first, but then once you start talking, like you said, "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is." Once you get that out, everything else kind of flows. But that is an experience, especially for someone I never knew what a federal court was until I had to learn how to step in it. So it was interesting.
They're pretty majestic for the people that are listening. Unlike a county, Cook County courtroom, or even some of the nicer courtrooms. A district courtroom is a very majestic place, and the judge at the front is like the Wizard of Oz. I mean, he's running everything. That's his world. Is that right?
Oh, right. They're high up on a pedestal.
Yeah,
and they're looking down at you, and they got the big seal with the eagle behind it. And, but in a way, it's impressive, but it makes you be a better lawyer too, because it's like, not that you want to ever tank a case or something like that, but it brings out you're bringing your A game to these cases. Like, wow, I'm in federal court, as opposed to I'm on the 11th floor of the Daily Center. It's not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
I treat those judges with the same respect, but you bring a different game to it, especially when you do federal trials. I mean, that in and of itself, the preparation and the rules and everything you want to do, you follow it to the letter because it's that important, because the seal of the United States of America is right there, and you're looking at it, and so you feel that you have to perform under it.
Well, I agree with you in that the district court is at Cook County. You can say, "Hey, judge." In district, they frown upon that. You're a county, you're a state's attorney, you're a state lawyer, aren't you? This is district court. This is a different. You got to step up your game. It is true. It's pretty impressive. Now we're going to run out of time here for just a minute, but I want you to give a little bit more advice about when you get out of law school. Now, I think the 7-Eleven is very good advice, but when you get out of law school, you're looking for a job. We got about a minute. Tell me a little bit about that.
I would say don't pigeonhole yourself to one thing unless you want to be a patent lawyer or a tax lawyer like yourself. Why pigeonhole yourself to one area? Open up your process, and you may find yourself in the interviewing for a job you never thought about that ends up being the right fit. So I know it was in my case. I had no aspirations to be a union lawyer, and I became one. And it was a great ride for 17 years.
Well, that, again, very good advice about that. Tell people how they can find you, Attorney Sanguinetti.
You can find me on the internet. I work at Rathje Woodward, Rathje Woodward, WODWARD. My phone number is area code 630-510-4917. We're the oldest law firm in DuPage County.
Okay, we're going to take a break here in just a minute. We're going to come back for regulars of the show. They know that the next segment is the Constitution segment, where we talk about the Constitution, and Attorney Sanguinetti is going to give us his take on some concepts and cases in the Constitution in the United States Supreme Court. Remember, if you're fighting the IRS, Fight them with open text advocates. Call us at 312-664-6649. Again, we're going to take a break. Join Attorney Sanguinetti and me at the Constitution segment on AM 560, The Answer. Let's go right into it.
You're listening to the Trust Radio Network on AM 560. The Answer. Step inside the minds of some of Chicago's most successful business leaders. Here's your host, Attorney Stephen A. Leahy.
From 1788 until the end of time, we the people make a resolution to defend the Constitution.
We're not going to sit here and listen to you badmouth the United States of America.
So let liberty, justice, and freedom ring. It's the Constitution segment.
Our Constitution is a document in which we, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
That's right, Ronnie. They don't always listen, but we got to keep telling them what to do. So welcome back to the program. We're here with Attorney Sanguinetti. As you know, this segment, I ask our guests to talk about a concept, provision, or case of the Constitution. And I wanted to ask Attorney Sanguinetti, what did you choose to talk about today, Attorney?
Well, the topic I chose to talk about that's related to the Constitution is separation of powers. I came into was exposed to this concept while in law school. Like all things in life, good things come from my wife. I decided to take a trip to Europe during law school for a summer semester studying abroad. And we had a month and a half course taught by Justice Antonin Scalia in Vienna, Austria, and about the Constitution. And one of the main segments of that was separation of powers. I had never given much thought to that other than just the regular civics lessons that you learn in high school, that the legislative, judicial, executive branch of government. But hearing Justice Scalia explain that, someone as an Italian American, I was very impressed with and awe of the first Italian American to sit on the Supreme Court. To explain that, obviously he's a very brilliant man, and how important it is. And the topic the way he introduced it, he goes, some people talk about a living constitution as if it's always evolving. And they think that the Constitution is like a jar of, I don't know if you remember, Prego spaghetti sauce. You say, it's in there. Like you can say anything's in the Constitution, it's in there. So the judge can find a law and create something just by creating something on the Constitution that's in there. And the example he used, and I think this is on topic, it's still controversial, very controversial, but was the Roe versus Wade decision of the idea of a right of privacy that creates an abortion right. Whatever you think of the issue of abortion, what his point was, when you have a court doing the job of a legislative branch of government, it inherently creates problems. It's outside of the Constitution as to what our founding fathers set up. That the judiciary is meant to interpret the law, not make them. But what the Supreme Court did in Roe was basically make a law. They stepped in the role of the legislature and did that. And I think his point was the service that did, what our founding fathers saw, was that we spent like over 50 years, and we're still dealing with it, of the impact of that judicial overreach when a legislature should have the power all the time to make abortion legal. If that's the will of the people, then there should pass a law to do it. You can't have judges trying to find things in order to make a constitutional right. It's either spelled out or it's not. And hearing that explanation, that he made a strict, constitutionalist out of me from at that moment, because it made sense. You can argue with people about it, and you can have good faith disagreements. But I don't know how you can intellectually, honestly, get around his point that the legislature is meant to do that, because when they do it, it's the will of the people. When you have judges deciding things, it's inherent for problems, because no one elects judges. You elect your legislature. So if the legislature does something against your will, you vote them out. But you can't do it with a judge. And so that that really made that issue sink in with me as far as how to look at the Constitution, and love it for that because where else maybe you have another place in the world, but
no,
it's so clearly defined. It's a beautiful thing.
I have to agree with you. It's a beautiful thing. I'm not an Italian American, but I got to tell you, Judge, he's my guy. Also, Judge Thomas, and I just to kind of reiterate what you're saying is that given the Dobbs decision, which sent it back to the states, that's why it didn't outlaw abortion. Let people decide for themselves, and that's what the Constitution allows us to do. Agreed?
Well, that's absolutely right. And like here in Illinois, I mean, you have a right to have an abortion. That's Indiana, you don't. Mm-hmm. But the point being is, I think also it's taken away this argument like, are you pro-life? Are you pro-choice? Like you have to be in this sort of tribal camp. Now it's just like, well, maybe there should be some pragmatism in it, right? I mean, maybe I'm for abortion up until viability, or cases of rape or incest or threats to a mother's life and things like that. It's no longer this, you're either this or you're that. You create a law and have it fashioned, and then that should be the end of discussion, because you have to actually have to have a conversation and compromise. And if you do that, I think a lot of our tribal warfare goes away, because you have to talk to people. You may disagree with them, but you agree on some things. And the some things you agree on, you make it into a law.
Well, very good point. I'm glad that you chose that. I have to agree with you 100%. Even if I didn't, I think it's a great. You presented it very well. Tell people how they can find you, Attorney Sanguinetti.
You can find me at Rathje Woodward. Our web address is www.rathje, RATHJE, Woodward, WOODWARD.com.
Well, thank you. I'm running out of time, so we're going to catch it on the other side. AM 560, The Answer. I went a little long. I'm sorry, but I didn't want to interrupt you because you were doing such a good job. So you don't have to be on the same side of the aisle to agree with what you just said, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. That was good. Now we're going to talk about. Do you have something that you'd like to talk about, Attorney Sanguinetti?
Oh, well, it's your show. Whatever you like to do.
We're going to talk about. I don't know if you want to talk about a war story. You want to answer questions. The last segment's very short, and so I think I am coming up to what's the one thing that you want people to know about your area of the law. But this next segment's a little longer. It's 7 minutes. Frequently asked questions. Would that work for you? You want to talk about what do you do now? You're not working with unions now, are you?
I'm not. So maybe I can discuss the transition over.
Okay, let's do that.
And it's because now I'm basically on the other side of the aisle, so to speak.
Yeah, I understand. You're with the law firm? How long you been with that? Well, let's do this on. Let's do this on. I don't want to get it in between the show. I want to get it on the show, so that's why I don't want to talk to you too much. Let's do it.
Now, back to the Trust Radio Network on AM 560. Hear from Chicago's business leaders. Learn who they are, what they do, and why they do it. Once again, here's attorney Stephen A. Leahy.
Welcome back to the show. We are here with Jolly Josh. I didn't even mention, he's already taken a bow, and I didn't even mention his name yet. Our technical producer, Jolly Josh. I was going to say Joe. I forget what it was. I'll ask Attorney Joylette. Okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh about that. Okay, we're here with our guest today is Attorney Sanguinetti. Attorney Sanguinetti, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Now we were talking. I know that you began, and you said for 17 years you helped. You were helping unions, and you were on the. What are you doing today?
Well, now I'm on the other side of the labor equation. I represent management, employers primarily. I do some work for employees for like wrongful discharge and breach of contract, employment contracts. But I had a transition from doing something I really loved, and I still have a lot of respect and friendships, with my former clients who organized labor to this day. I still talk to them regularly. My wife ran for political office in 2014, where she became the lieutenant governor under Bruce Rauner, who was for this concept called right to work. And what right to work is very briefly is for unions, it's the right not to exist. Saying that, hey, look, you don't have to pay dues, and no one, if you're not going to pay dues, the union's not going to get funded, the union will cease to exist. So obviously that created some problems for me, being a union lawyer, after my wife hooked up with somebody who was advocating for their destruction. So I had I saw the handwriting on the wall. No hard feelings. It was time to move on. So, and also my children were still very young at that point in time, and my wife had to travel all 102 counties. So I made a transition. So I've only been in two law firms in my life. The first one was a union law firm. The second one is where I'm at now, Woodward. And I had to make a switch. It wasn't easy. Convincing some. I tried to get jobs with other management law firms, but they didn't quite believe that I didn't drink the Kool-Aid. So they were saying, "Well, we can't really trust you. You're too good at a union lawyer. We don't think you're going to be able to be a management lawyer." But I got a chance at Woodward, and after a couple of years, I was starting to get clients. I was made partner, and so it's been a successful transition. I still talk to my old friends, and sometimes we're adversaries where we have to go up against each other. But such is life. You could disagree without being disagreeable.
Well, we talked about John Adams, right? About how you could be a patriot and still represent British soldiers, right? It doesn't make you not
exactly right. You can be a management lawyer and still respect the mission of organized labor. I mean, they're not there. I mean, you can have your opinions about the union movement in general, but overall most of the business agents are there to help workers. They legitimately believe that, and they think that there should be a better way. So it's like the legal process is adversarial. The labor world is adversarial. And it should because it should be a give and take. Not one side should have all the power.
I agree with that, and again, you can faith as an advocate, you could advocate for both sides, and I think the more you know about the other side, the better advocate you can be for the side that you are advocating for, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. And I knew all the tricks up their sleeve, and so I knew what to pull on them before they knew to pull it. So, it was very helpful that way. So.
Well, again, I think it does make sense to know both sides. So many, I know I've had attorneys who used to be prosecutors and become defense attorneys. That's a classic, isn't it? And that there's a lot of them. And the same thing with attorneys, tax attorneys. I used to work for the IRS, and now I help people on the other side. Okay, I don't want to talk about that.
Hey, look, you know how the loopholes and what you need to do in order to get around some of the IRS issues. And also you have the relationships with the IRS. Like, for instance, for a client that had an issue with a labor union, I won't name which union, but I called up their general counsel and was able to get it straightened out before there was a strike that would have shut them down. You got to have relationships. You got relationships with the other side. And hopefully I don't want to turn this into a political show, but we were talking before about how we have these tribal camps. You got to talk to people that you may disagree with. They're not your enemy. We're all Americans, and you got to find that it makes you a better person. Like you said, you're a better lawyer because you understand the other argument because you used to make it.
Well, I agree with that 100%, and I wish I am a big advocate that we all should get along, and we can disagree and still get along. And I think we are losing that, and I don't know why that is. And we could point a lot of fingers, but I don't want to. But I just want to recognize that that's happening, and then try to stop it, right? And so you can have friends on either side, and everybody's not evil just because they disagree with you on an issue.
Well, some people are evil.
I said everyone.
Not everybody.
Well, I agree that there is evil in this world. Tell people how they can find you, Attorney Sanguinetti.
You can find me at rathjewoodward.com, rathjewoodward.com, number 630-510-4917.
Well, thanks so much for that information. You help management with labor issues and employment issues, and everybody deserves an attorney, and good attorneys like yourself. So thanks so much for the work that you do. Remember now, this is the Trust Radio Network that's sponsored by the Law Office of Stephen A. Leahy, PC, and Opum Tax Advocates. Opum Tax Advocates helps business owners solve IRS problems. You should give them a call, 312-664-6649. We're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to do a final segment with Attorney Sanguinetti, and we're going to learn more a little bit about what he thinks. So we're going to, again, take a break. Join us on the other side on AM 560, The Answer. I had a new question to ask. See if I can find it. Okay. I said I was going to ask you about the one thing, but now I'm going to ask you, because we just were talking about it, about what makes a good attorney. Okay. It's a short segment. And so, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you that question. Okay.
Sure.
Let's do it, Joliet. I think this is going to be my new question, my last question every time.
And now, back to the Trust Radio Network on AM 560. The Answer. Real conversations with some of the most trusted professionals in Chicagoland. Once again, here's attorney Stephen A. Leahy.
Welcome back to the program. We're here with Joliet Josh, our technical producer. And if there's any sound issues, it's his fault. We're here with attorney Raymond Sanguinetti. He's an employment attorney. I mentioned earlier in the show, attorney Sanguinetti, that I have two sons that are in law school. One's finishing fairly quickly, and the other's just starting. But I want to ask you, what would make? We were just kind of talking about this, and that's kind of what brings it up. What makes a good attorney in your mind?
One word:
prepared.
Prepared. You have to be prepared. And that means you have to read the cases, understand what's going on. You can't just fly off the seat of your pants. And part of being prepared, I mean, the attorney is naturally curious. And that's why I like employment law. You're dealing with stories of people. So the cases center around like, why did I get fired? What did I do that led to my termination? You get involved in sort of like a soap opera. There's a little drama to it, so it makes it interesting. So it makes your preparation a little bit more palatable because you have an interesting fact pattern. It's not a patent case like how was this dishwasher designed similar to the other dishwasher. You're dealing with a human element to it. So and that preparation goes so far that it shows in everything you do. So your motions are better crafted. You appear in court, you have the respect of the judges and your opposing counsel. So everything else becomes easier because you're given the deference of knowing what you're talking about because you took the time to do it. And clients appreciate that too. And what I learned going out 7 years ago in the private sector from organized labor is that to get clients, the best source of referrals are people that you've represented. So if you do a good job, and because of that preparation, the fact that you cared enough to learn the case to represent your client to reach a resolution, may not always be 100% success, but they will respect you for that, and you will get more cases accordingly. And the same goes with the courthouse. When a judge sees that you know what you're doing, that you treat people with respect, that you're firm and you're an advocate, they should sometimes refer cases your way or tell someone that's looking for a lawyer, why don't you call this guy up and see if he can work something for you. And that's so you got that preparation. I think goes with a sense of pride as well. You have to take pride in your work. I mean, law is a profession, just like anything else, but like with anything else, if a carpenter doesn't take pride in their work, it's going to show. The angles are going to be crooked. Something's not going to be plumb. The same with the law. You may not always win, but if your legal work stands up, it speaks volumes about yourself and about your law firm too.
Well, that I'm glad I asked you that question, and I like your analogy with the carpenters, since you used to work for the carpenters union. So I thought that was appropriate to tell people how they can find you, Attorney Sanguinetti.
You can find me at ratchewoodward.com, RATHJE Woodward.com. My number is 630-510-4917.
Well, thanks so much for joining us here today. I'm glad you can join us. And again, one of the things I really love about this show is how much I learn. And so thank you for teaching me, and I appreciate that. Remember, the show is sponsored by Open Tax Advocates. Give them a call if you're a business owner and you have tax issues, IRS or Illinois Department of Revenue. Give us a call, 312-664-6649. Join us next week here on Saturday at 7 o'clock for the Trust Radio Network on AM 560, The Answer.
Thank you for tuning in to the Trust Radio Network on AM 560, The Answer. Be sure to join Attorney Stephen A. Leahy again next Saturday night at 7 as he engages in conversations with some of the most trusted professionals in all of Chicagoland. Enjoy interviews with local professionals dedicated to providing the very best products and services. Learn who they are, what they do, and most importantly, why they do it. Take a step inside the minds of some of Chicagoland's most successful business leaders and learn all there is to know on the Trust Radio Network with your host, Attorney Stephen A. Leahy. See you right back here next Saturday night at 7 on AM 560. The Answer.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Attorney Sanguinetti. I got to tell you, my Leslie Munger is a friend of the family here. Took very good care of my son. I don't know if you know Leslie or not, but she worked for.
She's good people. Her husband is a very nice man too. He's a lawyer too.
Yes, he is.
So yeah, she was very, very good with my wife when she was the controller and Evelyn was lieutenant governor. So just a decent person. And
yeah.
I wish he would have beat Mendoza.
I would have. So I'm a big fan of Leslie. She took a very good care of my son Jake. My son Jake is was doing some. He was the youngest elected official in Illinois. He's on a school board.
Okay.
And Leslie kind of took him under her wing and showed him the ropes. John, her husband, got him into because he went to University of Illinois and got him into his frat fraternity. So they're frat brothers. So Jake's my son. So he's a big fan of the Munger. So they're
good people.
If he is, then I am too. So I just wanted to mention that to you, and I wanted to thank you so much. And I got to tell you, I think that's my final question because that was a very good answer, and I appreciate your answer because what I put these all together. Like I have a whole bunch of attorneys. What advice would you have for law students? And then I put them all together, and and I think that's a great question too. So thanks so much for your time here today. I appreciate the last minute also that you appeared. I'll let you know where you can find this video, and once we clip it up, I'll give you that too. So thanks so much for joining us.
Steve, thank you very much. I actually had a good time. So
I knew you would. I told you would.
See, Kevin was right. I talk too much.
No, you talk just enough. As I told you, worst guest in the world is a guy who doesn't talk. So thanks so much for joining us.
Take care, Steve.
Okay, bye-bye now. Okay. Let me make sure that we got it off. Okay. Now, I have something important to talk about. As soon as I find my correct. There we go. Oh, got the wrong one up there. Okay, welcome, people. Here we're going to talk today. We're going to talk about. We're going to talk to Joliet Josh about the Thursday night Bears game. Take it over, Joliet.
That was
hard.
It was tough to watch.
It was tough.
It was tough to watch. Although I came into the game saying that despite their record, Washington had a lot of talent. So I wasn't expecting the Bears to blow them out or anything like that. So I'm not as down about it as everybody else. But it was tough because it's right there, and that's the worst part.
Well, that's and I say this a lot, and that's really the NFL. they're all good. I mean, obviously, they're all good athletes and they're all good players. But the difference between a good team and a bad team is like this, right? The good teams, because almost every game is at the end, right? You're fighting at the end. Either you can score and win, like Aaron Rodgers always does to the Bears, right? They get the ball with a minute left and they're down by 2. We're losing that game, right? And because good teams win those games and bad teams lose them, and almost all games are very close, and the bad teams just lose them all
every time.
And even when it's bad when there's 2 bad teams, because everybody kept saying how bad Washington was, and it's like we're supposed to beat them.
Well, so here's the thing. And after the game, everybody kind of got on Eberflus because he was like, "Oh, I think Justin took a step forward." I'm like, "How could you say that?" But if you listen to what he was saying, he was talking about his ability to get them into scoring position, and I agree. Matriculating the way down the field is tough to do. We saw that how much of a struggle it was for them last season. He definitely got them down there. They definitely have.
Now, if we could just learn to put the ball in the end zone.
So I want to blame him for throwing it bad because those are horrible. He has some bad throws down there. But also, why are you lining up in shotgun? Get under the center.
We talked about that last week, didn't we?
Get in there.
How could 2 guys like us talk about that last week? And they do. But I'm saying, I'm talking about you and I know. Everybody knows. Why don't they know?
Having the rookie back there for the clutch punt return. In years of watching football, I'm not a coach. I don't pretend to be. I don't claim to be as qualified as a coach. However, if I have a clutch situation, I'm not putting a first-year player back there. I'm just not. In that moment, I need my veteran. I don't even care if you run it back. Just secure the football.
This is what and I know a lot of these athletes. Sometimes because I watch baseball. Baseball is my sport and all the. But no matter what sport you're watching, you're like, these guys been in it their whole life, and it's like, don't you? But just as a fan, you seem to. Why do I know that and you don't?
Well, it's like with anything. When you're in it, it can be a little difficult to see minor details that.
But that's not that's like bedrock.
Right.
Okay. Again, coming down to an end of basketball game. Who am I going to put who's going to get the ball?
Player.
Yeah, you're going to you don't give it to the new guy.
He was making his debut and they were trying to 2 weeks in a row. So they had 2 weeks in a row. They had the rookie fumble a punt and they had that receiver, Smith Marset, cause them some kind of problem. Now I talked to the receiver after the game, after Thursday's game, and he was down. They cut him 2 days later. And it was the worst feeling because I felt for the guy. You could see him. He was feeling it. He was like, "We're gonna stick together. We're tough." I'm like, "Oh, dude, you're so out of here, bro." Nobody was talking to him. They didn't. It was rough, man. And
it's sad.
And I feel bad for him, but I also feel like this is the kind of position that the front office has put them in. You've done this to yourself. I can't feel bad. I can't feel surprised because they didn't spend any money on the offense.
I agree with that.
You know what I mean? And the defense is.
I agree with that, but then he's going to take the brunt of this because of bad management, and they put him in a bad spot that he shouldn't have been in.
Yes, the whole thing, this whole.
And this is what the Bears have done over and over and over again, especially with prime talent like our quarterbacks.
You know what the problem is, and I've said this before they hired before they hired Nagy. You can't keep bringing in regimes when you have certain personnel that you want to keep. So the quarterback and the front office have to be married. They just have to be, because otherwise that first year is going to be this. If this was their guy, I bet you whatever you want to put on it, that they would have put him with the proper weapons. If they'd have drafted Justin Fields, they would have surrounded him with weapons. Now I'm not saying they're down on Justin Fields, but you protect your investment.
No, but and also then you as you just said, you're invested, right? I'm building my team the way I want it to be built, and I can't do that with your pieces. I need my pieces,
and that's all that this year is about. But it's painful and it's tough for Justin because I think he's a very talented guy.
But we've ruined good quarterbacks before.
Yeah.
But that's what we were just saying. You're not supposed to put them in a spot that they can't shine.
Nope.
Right? So you get
their confidence.
They got these great, because let's face it, if you're in the NFL, I don't care where you are in it, you're a good athlete. Right. Okay. And you have potential. Otherwise you wouldn't be there. And so oftentimes it is the management who makes you a star. Right? Aaron Rodgers didn't start the first day he was in.
No. 3 years he took. I've been bringing up this example a lot this weekend, and not for this reason, but talking about Tom Brady and him, the things he's going through down in Tampa. He wanted to get out from New England because he didn't want to be under Bill Belichick's control, and Belichick was on him all the time because if he didn't yell at Tom, he couldn't yell at everybody else. He goes down to Tampa. Well, lo and behold, Bruce Arians is a strong personality too, and he got in you too. Well, he didn't like that either and got Bruce Arians up out of there. Now look at him, right? You got to know that management controls the situation. You execute, but they are putting you in position to do these things. And
I agree with that. And so again, that's Tom Brady, right? And I don't blame.
No, and he still needs.
And I don't blame Tom Brady for saying I want my guy, but you're the quarterback.
Just play football.
You're one of the pieces. You're not the the puzzle master. You know, you don't know the way.
It takes a different line of thinking.
I know I was talking about this about. Someone else was just talking about this about war, right? If I tell you, hey, you go here, you go there, you reach that hill, you do. It was like, well, what am I doing? What am I doing that for? You gotta have a strategy, right? There's a reason why I want you to be a running quarterback or a pocket quarterback, right? Because we're gonna build around having linemen that can protect the pocket, or you've got great legs, so let's build it so we can move them out. And you can take advantage of that. But if you build the team with the wrong pieces, it ain't going to work.
You're starting 2 second-year or rookie tackles, right? Your edges are already messed in because you have 2 young guys out there. Your interior has been reshuffled. And for all the flack Tevin Jenkins has got, he's been your best lineman all season. He's been your most consistent lineman when you left him in there at right guard. It's just their first-year people, and I'm not a professional, like I said at the beginning of this, but there are a lot of stuff that you look at, you're like, that probably should have gone a little bit differently.
Well, again, I thank you for your take on that. I think you're spot on. You know, and you know, you did warn me about this before the season started. I know the first game, everybody's like, "Hey, we're nah."
Well, the thing that concerned
the only thing that I like about this season is the Packers are getting beat up a little bit.
I love it. Isn't that great? Isn't that good? Let's hope it lasts.
So I wish it was us beating them up. But as long as someone's beating them up.
It's been so long. We got to take it.
As long as somebody's beating them up, I'm glad to see it. So anyway, thanks so much for that take. Remember, people, thanks so much for joining us. Give me the out.
Thank you for being a friend. Watching our podcast till the very end.
Out. You don't want to miss the end because then we get Jolly at Josh's take on the football. He's our guy on the field.